A royal visit turned into chaos when guards opened Camilla's son's car trunk and found something no one expected. Not weapons, not valuables, but a sealed box hiding Princess Diana's private letters and diaries. Camilla was furious. William was stunned. And what came next shook the palace to its core. The visit that triggered everything. It was supposed to be an ordinary morning. Tom Parker Bowles, son of Queen Camilla, arrived at Clarence's house earlier than expected. No press, no warning, no security motorcade, just him in a black car pulling quietly into the private entrance. For him, it was nothing more than a casual visit. A quick check-in with his mother before a scheduled meeting for his upcoming book. These visits weren't rare. He wasn't a working royal, but he remained close to Camilla, and she valued these short, unguarded moments with her children. Inside, Camilla was in her usual routine, seated in the small drawing room, tea in hand, newspaper folded, the kind of quiet morning she rarely got in the whirlwind of royal duties. She greeted Tom warmly, smiling in a way she didn't always get to around palace staff. With him, she didn't have to play a role. They talked about food, family, and nothing important. Just how she liked it. But outside, the tone was very different. Royal guards stationed in the courtyard had taken note of Tom's car, and something wasn't right. It wasn't the usual vehicle. The license plate wasn't registered on file for routine royal visits. The weight of the vehicle seemed off too, especially in the back. Sergeant Whitmore, a seasoned guard with a sharp eye for detail, noticed the trunk was sagging slightly, like it was holding something heavier than expected. Protocol demanded attention. Whitmore didn't raise alarms. He moved quietly, called in another guard through his earpiece, and began circling the car slowly. The vehicle wasn't threatening, but it wasn't entirely clean either, not according to royal security standards. And, with Clarence's house being an active royal residence, nothing could be left unchecked, especially when someone not officially tied to the firm had access to the queen consort. What began as a quiet family morning was now drawing silent attention. In the courtyard, movement slowed. Footmen glanced from windows. Staff walking by lowered their voices. Something was happening, and though nobody knew exactly what yet, they could all sense the atmosphere changing. Inside, Tom was laughing about a bizarre dish he'd tried in Paris. Camilla leaned in, smiling. They had no idea that just steps away, a locked trunk was about to change everything. Because in less than 5 minutes, that car would no longer be just a vehicle. It would become the center of a royal crisis no one could have predicted. The trunk that raised eyebrows. Sergeant Whitmore approached the car again. Up close, the sagging trunk looked even more suspicious. The model wasn't one he'd seen Tom use before, and more importantly, it hadn't gone through the usual pre-clearance system. These details mattered. With recent threats, updated protocols required guards to inspect any unverified vehicle, even if it belonged to the queen consort's son. Without making a scene, Whitmore called for a secondary guard to join him discreetly. They moved with quiet precision, aware that this wasn't just about security now. It was about optics. If this was handled poorly, it would embarrass not only the palace, but Camilla herself. Still, procedure came first. They slowly circled the car again, stopping at the rear. The trunk had no royal pass, no clearance badge. When Whitmore leaned slightly into the bumper, he felt resistance. The weight was definitely off. Something large and sealed was inside. Something too heavy and tightly packed to be dismissed as luggage or books. He radioed in. Standard inspection protocol was triggered. This meant one thing: The vehicle could no longer remain untouched, no matter whose name was on the mailbox. A message was sent to one of the indoor guards. Within moments, Tom Parker Bowles was approached, politely but firmly. "Sir," the guard said quietly, "we need you to step outside for a moment." Tom looked up, confused. "Is there a problem?" The guard didn't answer directly. "It's regarding your vehicle." From the drawing room window, Camilla saw her son stand and walk toward the courtyard. Her smile faded. Her posture straightened. She rose without a word. By the time she reached the entrance, 2 guards were already at the trunk. Tom stood beside them, visibly irritated. "It's just private things," he said. "Books. Some papers. Nothing dangerous." But Whitmore remained steady. "We understand, sir. But the car isn't on file. The trunk must be opened." Camilla stepped between them, voice sharp now. "What is this about?" Whitmore bowed slightly. "Ma'am, the vehicle isn't cleared, and the trunk is weighted unusually. For safety, it must be checked." Her eyes narrowed. She turned to Tom. "What on earth is in there?" Tom didn't answer, not directly. He sighed, ran a hand through his hair and gave in. "Fine. Open it." Whitmore reached down. The latch clicked. What happened next didn't just stun the guards. It shook the entire palace. Because what they found wasn't a threat, but a secret someone had tried very hard to bury. Camilla's sharp reaction. The moment the trunk creaked open, the air shifted. Inside wasn't luggage or spare clothes. It was a metal case, large, travel-worn, and secured with a combination lock. The kind of box that didn't just carry things, it protected them. The guards froze. Tom stood still. Camilla, now fully present in the courtyard, looked from the case to her son, confusion turning to unease. "What is that?" she asked sharply. Tom's voice was quiet, but tense. "It's private." Whitmore didn't flinch. "Locked containers must be opened or removed, ma'am. That's standard protocol." Camilla took a step forward, protective now. "He is my son. Do you truly believe he poses any threat?" "It's not about who he is," Whitmore replied. "It's about what's in the box." The exchange grew heavier with every second. Tom crossed his arms. His body language had changed, guarded, uncomfortable, not out of guilt, but like someone suddenly aware he was holding something far bigger than himself. He sighed again, this time deeper. "I'd rather you didn't look inside." Camilla's eyes darted to him. That answer wasn't good enough, for the guards, or for her. Silence hung in the air. Just then, the gates opened. A black car turned into the drive and then everything froze, because it wasn't just anyone arriving. It was Prince William. William arrives, and everything changes. The car hadn't even come to a full stop before the atmosphere changed entirely. William stepped out, briefcase in hand, jacket over one shoulder. He had arrived to discuss an upcoming event with Camilla. What he found instead was a courtyard filled with tension. Guards standing alert, Camilla visibly agitated, and Tom facing a half-open trunk with a steel box inside. He took one look at the scene and immediately walked over. "What's going on?" he asked. Sergeant Whitmore stepped forward and explained everything in a low voice. The unregistered car, the suspicious weight in the trunk, the sealed metal case, and Tom's refusal to allow inspection. William listened silently. His face didn't reveal much, but his stance changed. He was no longer just a royal family member. He was the future king, and the moment demanded a decision. He turned to Tom. "What's in the box?" Tom hesitated. "It's private." "That's not enough," William said calmly. "If it's on royal property and it's locked, it gets checked." Tom stood firm. "It's personal. Family things." But William didn't budge. "Then let's see them. Now!" Camilla stepped in, voice tight. "William..." But he didn't look at her. He was watching Tom, and Tom knew he had no way out. With a reluctant nod, he gave Whitmore the combination. The guards unlocked the box and opened it slowly, and what they found inside left the entire courtyard in stunned silence. There were stacks of handwritten letters tied in ribbon, several leather-bound diaries creased with age, and at the bottom, 2 envelopes, both marked in Princess Diana's handwriting. William didn't speak. He didn't need to. Everyone knew. Whatever was inside that box had never been meant to end up here. And now, standing in the middle of Clarence's house, the son of Diana realized his mother's past had just been reopened, and someone in this family had been keeping it buried. Diana's secrets inside the trunk. No one moved. The courtyard, moments ago full of questions and tension, now stood frozen in stunned silence. Even the guards, who had seen everything, couldn't hide the look on their faces. Inside the metal trunk, beneath worn layers of tissue and fabric, were handwritten pages, aged and slightly curled. Leather-bound diaries, some cracked at the spine. Envelopes, 2 of them, sealed, marked clearly in a script the future king knew all too well, Princess Diana's handwriting. William reached in slowly, like the air around him had thickened. His fingers brushed across the top page, bold strokes, slanted letters, loops that pulled at memory. He knew immediately these weren't just casual notes or forgotten letters. These were personal, possibly painful, and very clearly never meant to be here. Tom said nothing. He didn't explain how they'd gotten into his car. He didn't claim ownership. He didn't say they were gifts or that they had been found. His silence became louder than words, and that silence hit William like a storm. These weren't just documents. These were pieces of his mother's truth. Pages that should have been locked in the royal archives or preserved for the family, not hidden in the trunk of his stepbrother's unregistered car. Camilla remained still, unusually so. William glanced at her, just briefly, and saw something strange. She didn't look surprised, and that unsettled him more than anything, because someone hadn't just mishandled Diana's letters. Someone had tried to keep them out of sight, and now they were finally in the light. The unspoken truth between them. The box was closed, but the damage was open. Back at Kensington Palace, William sat alone in his study, the contents now laid out on his desk. He didn't call aides. He didn't notify the archives. He needed time. Time to understand what he was holding. These weren't historical artifacts. These were Diana's private thoughts, frozen in ink and pain. The first few entries were deeply personal, stories of feeling watched, misunderstood, pushed aside inside her own home. She wrote about phone calls she believed were listened to, letters intercepted, and moments where even her own voice didn't feel like her own anymore. Then he saw the date. One of the diaries was marked 1995, the same year she gave the explosive Panorama interview, the year she decided to stop playing the part. And in one entry, a line that chilled him: "If anything happens to me, it will not be an accident." William sat back, jaw clenched, eyes locked on the page. That single sentence made everything shift. This wasn't family gossip. It wasn't emotion poured into a journal. It was a warning. Back at Clarence's house, Tom had refused to explain anything. He hadn't said where the documents came from. He hadn't said who gave them to him. He hadn't said why he had them. And that silence had only one effect. It made William trust him less. But what disturbed him even more was Camilla. She hadn't asked what was in the box. She hadn't seemed confused. Her calmness now felt less like control and more like calculated distance. The deeper William read, the clearer it became. These letters were never supposed to surface. But now they had, and the questions they raised were far more dangerous than the box they came in. The letters that shouldn't exist. The longer William read, the harder it became to breathe. Page after page, he was seeing his mother in a way he hadn't in years, not as the polished royal figure framed by the media, but as a woman quietly battling forces bigger than anyone ever admitted. These letters weren't meant for public eyes. They weren't interviews or curated speeches. They were raw, handwritten entries, thoughts Diana had locked away when no one would listen. In one diary, she described feeling like a guest inside her own marriage. She wrote about palace aides who filtered information, twisted her words, and turned silence into strategy. She questioned which staff she could trust and detailed how decisions were made without her knowledge, decisions that affected her image, her access, and her children. And then came the entry that froze him. They tell me to stay quiet, that it's better for everyone. But the truth is eating me. If anything happens to me, it will not be an accident. William set the journal down. His hands shook. He wasn't reading drama. He was reading a woman in fear, surrounded by people who didn't protect her. These weren't thoughts scribbled in panic. They were calculated, controlled, documented, and they were never meant to disappear. Yet, somehow, they had. How had these pages vanished from the royal archives? Who took them? And why were they now sitting in a steel box inside Tom Parker Bowles's car? That question looped in his head again and again. He knew Tom wasn't the type to break into vaults or commit theft. But he also knew Diana's diaries weren't something you find in a charity shop. These had been hidden and deliberately handed off. The deeper William looked, the more the timeline disturbed him. Many of the entries were from 1995 to 1997, the final years of Diana's life, the most volatile, the most unfiltered. She detailed unrecorded meetings, hinted at people she didn't name but clearly feared, and made clear she believed there were things happening behind closed doors that no one would believe until it was too late. She spoke about Camilla, too, carefully, never cruelly, but always present. Diana wrote about the shadow that never left her marriage, about the ache of being publicly replaced before the story was ever over. There was no jealousy in her tone, only quiet resignation. I was never alone. Not really. Even when I was smiling. Those words haunted him. These were the pieces of Diana the public never saw. The parts the firm buried, either out of fear or preservation. But now, her son had them. Not from the crown, but from a trunk opened by accident. Back at Clarence's house, Tom had stayed quiet. He hadn't explained where the box came from or who gave it to him. He offered no defense, no denial, and most importantly, no explanation. And that silence, in this context, was devastating. Because these weren't just forgotten papers. These were the missing chapters of Diana's life, and someone had tried to keep them out of William's hands. Until now. Camilla's quiet panic. As news of the trunk inspection reached inside the walls of Clarence's house, Camilla retreated to her private quarters. Not publicly, not dramatically, quietly. Her face pale, her jaw locked, her movements stiff. Behind closed doors, she summoned her private secretary and made one request: tell Tom not to speak to anyone. About anything. It wasn't a reaction of someone confused by the situation. It was the reaction of someone who understood exactly what had just been found. She had spent decades carefully rebuilding her public image. From the vilified other woman to queen consort, from tabloid scandal to royal respectability. And yet, in a single afternoon, one locked trunk had threatened to undo all of it. Because the letters weren't just emotional, they were dangerous. They weren't slander, they were truths told too clearly. If the public ever saw those words in Diana's handwriting, it would reignite everything. The media scrutiny, the conspiracies, the comparisons. Worse, it would pull Camilla back into a narrative she had spent her entire royal career trying to close. Inside her office, aides debated. Some wanted to spin the situation, issue a private statement. Others suggested letting it fade quietly, assuming William wouldn't want to escalate things. But Camilla knew better. This wasn't gossip. This wasn't a tabloid leak. This was Diana's voice, uncovered by her son, and now staring directly at the heart of the palace. And Camilla had seen the look in William's eyes. He wasn't just shocked. He was changed. She paced the room in silence. If William traced how those diaries got into Tom's hands, if he pushed for answers, the consequences could be catastrophic, especially if the trail led anywhere near her. Even suspicion, even whispers could tear open wounds the firm had fought for years to seal. She wasn't the only one panicking. At Kensington, William had already begun reviewing the situation with his most trusted aides. No press, no police, just control. He didn't want to humiliate anyone, but he also knew this couldn't be swept away. The documents were too important, and the silence around them was too intentional. He ordered that Tom be formally questioned, not as a suspect, but as a figure in possession of sensitive material. The conversation was to be private, but recorded. And Tom's answer? I didn't steal them. I didn't sneak into any archive. But I'm not saying more than that. It was the worst answer possible. It didn't confirm guilt, but it confirmed a secret. Camilla sat in her room, staring at the wall. She didn't say it out loud, but the thought echoed in her mind. This is how it starts. Not with a press leak, not with a scandal, but with a trunk, a name in familiar handwriting, and a prince holding pages of his mother's truth, pages someone had hoped he'd never find. But now, he had, and everything was unraveling. The palace in full crisis mode. The next morning, the mood inside Kensington Palace was different. Quieter, tighter, not the quiet of peace, the quiet that comes before a storm. Prince William had already met privately with his closest aides. The jewelry box was no longer the center of attention. Now it was the trunk, the documents, and the implications. There were no rumors anymore, only facts that couldn't be denied. Diana's missing letters and diaries, now confirmed to be real and written in her own hand, had surfaced not through an official release or a family heirloom, but from the back of Camilla's son's car. The royal household could not ignore this, even if they wanted to. William was calm but calculating. He gave a clear order. The documents were to be classified as royal property, handled under the Royal Collections Act. That meant any unauthorized possession, even by family, could technically be treated as theft. But William wasn't rushing to press charges. Not yet. Instead, He focused on clarity. He requested full access to palace archives from 1995 to 1997, years marked by internal tension, media wars, and the slow unraveling of his mother's life behind closed doors. He also ordered a private internal review. Who had accessed Diana's personal effects since her death? Who had permission? And who could have leaked or removed documents this personal? His aides began creating timelines, requesting access logs, revisiting old catalog entries. Everything was handled discreetly. But inside the palace walls, it was no secret anymore. A full-scale royal audit had begun. Meanwhile, the guards who opened the trunk, including Sergeant Whitmore, were instructed to write detailed statements. Every step, every observation, every word Tom had said, now part of a formal palace file. The crisis wasn't just unfolding, it was being documented. Camilla, on the other hand, had slipped behind the curtain. At Clarence's house, she met with her inner circle, panicked, pale, and visibly shaken. She hadn't spoken publicly. She hadn't contacted William, but insiders say she spent the entire morning trying to manage the damage before it reached the press. The palace press team, however, was already receiving calls. A reporter from The Times phoned the communications office that same afternoon, asking if there had been a security issue involving private items at Clarence's house. No one had leaked it yet, but someone knew. The walls were closing in, and now all eyes were on William. Would he protect Camilla? Would he shield Tom? Or would he risk the fallout and defend the only person whose voice had been silenced for too long, Diana? William's impossible choice. As night fell over London, Prince William sat alone in his study, the trunk locked securely at his side, the documents spread before him like evidence. But this wasn't just about finding out what happened. This was about what came next. He had two paths, and neither offered peace. If he pursued this fully, Camilla's son could be exposed. A public scandal could follow. Camilla's position as queen consort might suffer irreparable damage. The monarchy could fracture from the inside. If he buried it, he'd be protecting the institution. But at what cost? Diana's voice would be silenced again. Her final truth, once buried in shadows, would be hidden once more. Not by strangers, but by her own son. He stared at her handwriting, the same words repeated in his mind. Speak when they expect you to bow. He knew she wasn't talking about rebellion. She was talking about courage. Catherine entered quietly. She looked at him, then at the table. "What will you do?" she asked softly. William didn't answer right away. He looked at the trunk. He looked at his mother's name scrawled across envelopes that hadn't seen daylight in 25 years. Then he finally spoke. "If I let this slide, I weaken the crown. If I push, I destroy them." And there it was, the truth he had been circling all day. There was no outcome that left the monarchy untouched, no option that spared everyone. But deep down, he already knew. Diana hadn't left him a command. She'd left him a responsibility, a legacy, a map, and most of all, a final test of who he truly was. By morning, he made his decision. The first official move was quiet. A letter to Sir Clive Alden, his father's private secretary, requesting a joint review of all documents labeled under Diana's name. The second was more personal, a direct call to his father. Charles answered, tired, measured. He listened as William explained what was found and how it was found. Charles gave only one answer. "Handle it, but don't let it destroy us." It wasn't a warning. It was a permission slip and a burden handed down. William ended the call, returned to the trunk and placed his hand on the lid. Whatever happened next, it wouldn't be about revenge. It wouldn't be about scandal. It would be about truth. And who was finally ready to carry it? Because this time, the cover-up would not win. Not when the son had finally opened the box meant only for him and found inside a mother's unfinished story, too powerful to ignore. Camilla wanted to protect her son. William wanted answers. And the truth? It was written in Diana's own hand, hidden for decades, now exposed by accident. The firm stands at a crossroads, because once these secrets are known, there's no turning back. What will William do next? The Crown is watching.